Next up, we're going to have Jacob Stein. He's with the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And this presentation is going to be on U.S. light rail systems, a comparison of San Diego, Seattle, and Charlotte systems. And a special interest to those of us in the area because they're starting to plan and fund the light rail in Orange County and Chapel Hill locally. So it'll be interesting to see. If you wanted to show your slides later, you can always jump back in. We're running fast. We're going to be done early. So.
There we go. All right. So what I'm presenting on is, like you said, a comparison of San Diego, Seattle, and Charlotte's light rail systems. I started this project last semester with a colleague, Kim Eubanks, and then when I was asked to present here, or told rather, I went back in and changed some of the parameters that we did. Sorry. All right, let's start again. I did this project started this project last semester, and when I was asked to present here, I switched it, changed up the parameters a little bit, changed it up. Hold on a sec. Sorry about that. All right, what a light rail system is, according to the Transit Research Board, is a metropolitan electric railway system, which is just a fancy way of saying that it's a intercity passenger rail that falls somewhere in between the heavy rail like Amtrak and streetcars and trams. It's less expensive than heavy rapid transit, so Amtrak. And it's also faster, further, and carries more people than trams. Like you were saying, the Chapel Hill Raleigh area are starting to get their self a light rail system. These are all the cities that have light rail, or in some cases, heavier commuter. But the systems I looked at in particular were San Diego, Seattle, and Charlotte's. The original basis for the project was to look at what Charlotte can do better to make it more, as it grows, make it more productive, carry more people. This time around, I was looking at trying to figure out what makes Seattle's system so much more productive. Seattle has an average weekday ridership of 68,000. San Diego and Charlotte have a fourth and a fifth, respectively. They're pretty much, San Diego's is gigantic in terms of length. Most of that is coaster, which is a cross between, it goes up the coast from one end of the county/city to the other. And it's a cross between light rail and heavy rail. It's kind of a weird area in between, but it's still part of their light rail system. But for the most part, all these were built in the same 2-3-year period. So they've all been around just about the same amount of time, with Seattle's gaining a much larger amount of ridership far quicker than the other two cities. I looked at the demographics to try to figure out a little bit whether it was what exactly was behind Seattle's having 4 times as much ridership. The population of San Diego far exceeds either the other two cities. It's, I think, the 5th largest one. It's in the top 10 most populated counties/cities in the country. The median age is about the same. The median household income, with Seattle being a good step above, but Charlotte, San Diego, relatively in the same area. I looked at racial breakdowns to see if that played a part. It potentially plays a part in Seattle's case, but I think that I'll get into that a little later in the presentation. But these are the transportation statistics I was looking at in terms of, I guess, share of all commuters to see if that has any part in it. In this case, it does. Like Seattle having 4 or 5 times as many ridership, it also has it has 5 times as much percentage of the workforce using public transportation. It's not up here, but it also has, I think, 16% of their population uses transportation uses walking. So I guess there's a lot more people living incredibly close to where they're working. So that certainly plays a part. But yeah, so San Diego and Charlotte San Diego has a larger amount of commuters, but relatively the same percentage of the workforce using public transit. That might play a part in the San Diego's light rail system isn't particularly as central. It's not really as helpful for people getting to and from work based on talking to a few people who lived there. Most of the, I guess, stops run up and down the coast, which isn't really helpful to some people. I tried to look at who uses public transportation by age group to see if that played a part. It doesn't really, at least statistically. They're all relatively in the same age range and average age in terms of usage. So it's not, I couldn't figure out if that played a part, but it was worth looking at, so I put it in the presentation. Overall, my methods were I took census block data to look at population income, so the racial breakdowns and who lives where in terms of how much they're making. The first time around, I used census tracts, but that was not precise enough, so we switched to block groups this time. In terms of part of it was accessibility to walking, because if you have a car, there's a good chance you're not going to use light rail to some degree. So the original presentation was looking at accessibility. Who has lower income areas or people who don't have cars? Is it a viable way of getting them to and from work, or in essence, getting them to or from other important areas of their life? Let's see. All right, so I broke down the light rail system is the center line, and I did a quarter mile, half mile, and 1 mile buffer. The original research was doing quarter mile. This time around, I did half and a mile, which is to some degree a reasonable walking distance. Quarter mile is more, but to expand the data set. I also looked in terms of the accessibility and not so much commute. I looked at who has park access, hospital access. I tried to do food access, but the cities have conflicting definitions of what a supermarket is and what food access is. So it's a little harder to figure out that. So I also broke down who lives where, not necessarily indicative of income levels, but it certainly is indicative of looking at who might be using it. They're relatively the same matter in terms of population, percent of the population around it. There's roughly the same amount of percentage of the population Hispanics near the light rails of all 3 cities, similar to Caucasians, African Americans, and Asians. It's all relatively similar. The difference is based on the breakdowns of the cities. Charlotte has a far higher African American population. San Diego has a far higher Hispanic, and Seattle has a vastly majority Caucasian. As I was discussing earlier, San Diego's line is far larger and runs the entire length of the coast from Tijuana all the way up to, trying to remember what that city's called, but I can't. What is it? I thought La Jolla was, well, that's not the important part. I'm not trying to figure that out. Shouldn't be figuring that out. But anyway, looking at the median household income, it's roughly the same. Or roughly a similar breakdown to what Charlotte was in terms of who lives where. Lower income areas in Charlotte is roughly the same as roughly the income areas for San Diego in terms of where they are. San Diego has far more parks, but the access is similar to Charlotte. African Americans, Asians. San Diego and Seattle have a higher Asian population than Charlotte does, which isn't necessarily not expected. Far higher Hispanic than the other 2 cities. Seattle is a smaller condensed area. It runs from the University of Washington in the north to their airport in the south. So, and with theirs supposedly coming in 2018 going to be an additional 4 stops above where UW is, but they didn't put that into location, so I couldn't map that just yet. Again, the breakdown of racial: Asians, Hispanics, Caucasians, with a higher percentage of Caucasians in Seattle. Let's talk about accessibility. So the other aspect of accessibility in Charlotte, and then I expanded to the other 3 cities, is in terms of buses. If you can't walk to it, can you have access to have buses? Can buses bring you in and allow you to have access to it? Which to some degree they did. So Charlotte has 828 bus stops within a mile, and that is out of 3,008 bus stops in the county or area, city area. San Diego has far higher, but their system is out of 6,638. So San Diego's bus system is a little more centralized in that case. With Seattle, it's out of 8,088. I think that's more the entirety of King County, not just the city of Seattle, but in terms of the total bus stops. I looked at hospitals. San Diego and Seattle have great data for hospitals. Charlotte, not so much. That is another step I'm going to take when I continue this. Is it looks like in Charlotte I'm going to have to individually geolocate each of the clinics and facilities, which makes it a little harder to do. I haven't finished that yet. But yes, so 24 medical clinics in San Diego within a mile, 51 in Seattle. Most of the data came from either the American Public Transportation Association, or the census, specifically the American Community Survey. Based on, well, that's repetitive, darn it. The basic demographic data doesn't indicate any major differences. So I chalked it up to, until I get qualitative data, I'm chalking it up to a culture difference. San Diego's system moves through higher population areas and has 3 times the same things, but it doesn't correlate. So again, I think it's culture. But in conclusion, like I was saying, I think in terms of for Seattle, it's a culture, not so much demographic or income based. It may contribute to it also as we go further and become more increasingly conscious of fossil fuel consumptions. Public transportation is a tool that we need to use, so that's why I did the research. But yeah, so the location of San Diego affects it, and the culture of Seattle. All right, I went through that way too fast. Questions? Yes. All right.
Question. Did you use the whole light rail, including the extension?
Yes.
Okay. So the ridership is not indicative of the entire light rail?
No, it's not. It hasn't opened yet. But in terms of, for the ridership, it's just what's current. I should have mentioned that. But yeah, in ridership is what's current with the most recent data. But in terms of access, given it was opening in August, I decided to include that. In terms for the parks and park access in terms of hospitals. One of the hospitals that I did have data for through the city is on the extension, so at the moment I guess you don't have access to it. But yeah, I didn't include that in the presentation or thought about it.
Is that the number of stops that have access within a quarter mile of the light rail, is that with all the stations?
That's including the my advisor suggested I use the extension because it would increase the accuracy of my data. But yeah, it's including the stops, the new stops, and the extension. So it's, I guess that does make the data a little shaky for Charlotte. based on the stuff. This is only based on their websites, which kind of means that has the potential to be biased. But yeah, Seattle's based on their, I guess, rotation. They have far quicker or far more, I guess, precise schedule, and they also are running 2 lines. So 2 stops will be, or I guess I think the way that their schedule was working was that you'll have 2 trains go through in a relatively frequent period. So yeah, that might include it. San Diego's, it sounds like it's fairly consistent, but again, most of the rail seems to be running up the coast, which isn't necessarily where the people are actually commuting from. And Charlotte's is fairly precise, but I guess standard. You know when the stops are coming and such. Okay, she's asking how often does it run in terms of it, an add-on to that question of reliability. Seattle's is it's running fairly regularly throughout the whole day. It runs on the weekends. It's a little less, I guess, frequent on the weekends. But yeah, it's runs from 6 a.m. through, I think, 8 p.m., and it's fairly consistent. Wait times. That is something that if I continue that would be a good way of connecting it. I had looked at it, but I hadn't factored it into the reliability. I know that through Seattle's public transit authority, they do have a list of wait times on there, but I hadn't taken an in-depth look at that. I don't know whether CATS, he could probably answer that better, whether CATS has that. In San Diego, I hadn't looked at that. Their transit authority is a little... Wait time lists. She's talking about how if you can tell what the wait time is, like when the next train's going to come.
I mean, yeah, we have that way. I think it's every 10 minutes, it's 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Not sure what it is. And then on the weekend, yeah,
But yeah, that's a good thing to add going forward as I increase the research. Anything else? Yes. Yeah, San Diego's, it was a little harder to figure out a standard amount for parking. That is something I wanted to include, but I got told that I was presenting fairly recently. So I'm planning to have a more comprehensive, like publishable thing by the end of the semester. That was, if I put all this work into it, my advisor was like, you might as well write it up and find a more, I guess, publish-worthy data set. So that is a certainly look. I know that I've visited San Diego, and San Diego's parking is everywhere. I haven't visited Seattle, so that might be looking at qualitative and trying to figure out average parking cost.
sorry, question.
No.
Did you look at land use and population and job density within the urbanized areas?
Not yet. That was something I want to do, is look at land use patterns. Job density is certainly something I hadn't considered, but that certainly would be a incredibly useful tool. Looking at where on the track their jobs are, but I'm assuming with cats, it's most likely going to be relatively downtown to some degree. But yeah, that's certainly something to add in. Yes, that is again something else I can add. I was looking at, there's a lot of things I'm adding by the end of the semester. I'm adding everything. To start with, I was looking at food access, hospital access, and park access in terms of for health conscious, because my advisor works with health. He's very health specific. He's a medical geographer. But yeah, those things certainly would add in. There's a lot of things, I guess, coming out of this session. Looks like I have a lot of things to add before the end of the semester. I'll get on that. Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you for your time.